Welcome to Adventures in Life. I'm Earl Beecher, your host. Our guest is Todd Huiskin, MFT, and he is a disaster preparedness expert. And I think that's very timely with all the excitement we're having about disasters around the world. Todd, MFT differs from MFCC. I understand MFCC, which stands for?
Marriage, Family, and Child Counselor.
What's MFT?
Well, California is the only state that wanted a separate descriptive term for marriage and family child counselor. The rest of the states in the United States use marriage and family therapist. But lately, California's come around and has changed MFCC to MFT, so they're like everybody else now.
Okay, what does that mean when you're an MFT?
Just marriage and family therapist.
Psychology?
Well, a marriage and family therapist is a master's degree with a specialization in working with marriages, with families, with children, whereas a psychology degree is a four-year doctorate that really specializes more in testing and individual issues.
I see. Now, you are here today because you are a disaster preparedness expert. What's your background in that? Tell us about some of the things that you've seen or...
You know, I first actually got into it simply by volunteering for the American Red Cross. And there's a lot of disasters that go on in the community all the time. Apartment fires or hazardous waste spills. And then,
where people individually need help.
Right. Individually or even small groups. Like an apartment complex catches on fire and there may be 200 people that are displaced. And that, for those people, is a significant emergency.
That's a good-sized group.
So then the more time that I spent volunteering, I ended up just working my way to a volunteer position of Assistant Director of Mental Health Services in the American Red Cross, just by virtue of the fact that I do counseling. And then I started to get sent out to further larger disasters like Hurricane Katrina.
You brought us some pictures of that, didn't you?
I did.
Let me see if I can get one of them here on the camera somehow so that we can... What is this?
This is a picture from Gulfport in Mississippi after Hurricane Katrina came through. This is actually the picture of where the fire station and the police stations used to stand after the hurricane. And as you can see, there's nothing left, which kind of is a perfect example for what we're talking about today. In a time of disaster, if you're hoping to rely on the fire department or hoping to rely on the police department, in many cases, they're not around.
They got troubles of their own.
That's exactly right.
Let's run through some of these pictures, and then I want to get right into the heart of the discussion. Okay. What is this, please?
You know, this is a picture of just some different community groups that after the disaster, they were out with barbecues, cooking food for people that didn't have any food. Much of the support for the people wasn't coming from the government. It was just coming from good people that wanted to volunteer their time.
Mostly neighbors and friends?
Mostly neighbors, friends, churches. This was one of the churches in the area that
I have this?
Yeah, that's correct. They turned their basketball hall into a big storage center where they had lots of supplies shipped, and people could stop by the building, pick up water, pick up toothbrushes, toothpaste, sleeping bags, chainsaws, anything that they needed.
Chainsaws?
Chainsaws, hammers, nails, tarps, just to do repairs on their homes.
There's a lot of repair and construction type effort needed.
Yes, especially right after, because people need to...
What was your initial reaction when this was in Mississippi? Were you out in the woods or were you in a city?
You know, we were right near the coast, right near Biloxi, Mississippi.
I've been in Biloxi, but it was years ago.
Yeah, it's got the base is down there.
Uh-huh.
You know, my first impression when I got there was it just looks like an atomic bomb dropped. I mean, there were neighborhoods where there had been beautiful beach homes and there was nothing left. In fact, this picture right here is an example. These used to be beautifully manicured streets, and it looks like it's just a big junk heap. And it's because the disaster was so severe. The flood waters came up 20 feet and just washed everything away.
I've seen pictures, even moving pictures, of when the tsunami hit in Thailand and just washed everything away. I mean,
yeah, Even the people that were prepared, that had emergency preparedness supplies, if they were still in their homes, it didn't do them any good because their homes were gone. You know, people's belongings were washed miles inland or downstream, and so it was very difficult for those people.
It was several years ago, more than 15, when the Orange County Business Journal asked me to do some research on a possible earthquake, especially on the San Andreas. And I wrote the front page article for them on this disaster. And the Army Engineer Corps was one of the prime groups I met with, and also I got all kinds of information from them. And also the Fire Chiefs organization in Orange County. There were a lot of the fire chiefs. And they had certain things that they were worried about. Now, you were talking about here where there was a hurricane
Right.
in Mississippi, but I think we're not as likely to have the hurricane kind of damage, but we need to be prepared for a possible earthquake. The last one, major, that occurred on the San Andreas was 1856, and they say they're due about every 150 years, which puts us a little overdue, which is not a comfortable thought. And how do we prepare for something like that?
Well, I think you're right. It's a scary thought to think that any day a major earthquake could happen. But there are some basic things that almost anybody can do to at least prepare themselves for the immediate days right after an earthquake. Because it may not be a big earthquake all around, it may just be a small one in your area, but you're still going to need to be prepared.
Yes, okay. Give me a step-by-step maybe of what we should be thinking.
Okay, so a couple of things that everybody is just going to want to have in place, no matter who they are, no matter where they are in the United States. Number one is the very minimum, you're going to want to have 3 days of food and water.
So you can survive 72 hours, I think is the magic figure, isn't it?
Right, and you know, that's by far the minimum. It really, in most disaster areas, it takes at least a week to be able to get shipments of supplies in, because if you have an earthquake, you have overpasses that are falling, you have trees and wires that are down.
Oh, yeah.
And if the trucks can't get through, there's no supplies that are coming in.
Well, we've got enough bridges and overpasses on freeways and surface streets that they'd be blocked 2 or 3 a mile at least.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I think that's really important for people to have is they should have a small amount of cash on hand in their homes, because when an earthquake happens, if the electricity goes out, then you can't use your credit cards. You're not going to be able to get money out of an ATM machine. And a lot of times in those situations, people will come in from the outside to sell goods to you from the unaffected areas, but they're only selling by cash. And so if you need a tarp for your roof and they say it's $50 and the prices are a little bit inflated at times of disaster.
Isn't that terrible?
It is terrible. But if you really need it because it looks like it's going to rain or you want to protect your family, really people should have about $800 in cash somewhere in case of emergency so that they could get by.
You know what comes to my mind is, if you've got $800 in cash in the house, who's going to come in and want it?
That's right.
That's another emergency in itself. Okay, what do we do now? We know we need food.
Right.
We need water.
Copies of all your important documents in a waterproof container. You know, sometimes we keep them in a folder, we keep them at home, and that's fine. But if your house catches on fire in an earthquake, and the fire department comes in and puts out the fire with water, all those documents will get wet. So if you can put them in a Ziploc container, a Ziploc baggie or a Tupperware container, and then put them someplace, then they're going to be much safer.
Water protected.
Water protected.
How about fire protected?
Well, if you can have a safe, that's even better. I mean, that's ideal, is a fireproof safe, and then have your documents in a Tupperware container in there, because even most safes are not waterproof.
No.
And the water will destroy your birth certificates, your bank account statements, and you'll need all those to be able to get money out. Because again, the computers, aren't going to be up if the electricity's not up, and you will need those documents.
I was thinking of an old movie I saw, San Francisco, which showed the earthquake and then showed the fire afterwards. And I think the fire did almost more damage than the quake did.
Yeah, it really did. And I think today we're a little more educated. I mean, we know that we're supposed to know where the gas shutoff is.
Okay, these are things step by step.
Right, right. You have to know, I mean, you have to imagine if the ground is going to shake, there's a good chance that your water pipes are going to break underground. There's a good chance that the gas lines are going to break underground. There's a good chance that the electric wires are going to go down. And so you want to know some very important things, like where can I shut off my gas? Because you don't want gas coming into the house. Where can I shut off my water so that my house doesn't get flooded and then get moldy because there's no electricity to help to repair things? I mean, that's a real important thing that most people can do in their home right now.
So mold could be a major problem that we don't think about associated with earthquake.
Exactly. A lot of times we think that if our house, we think in terms of if our house gets flooded, then we may have to rip out the carpet or start pulling some of the wallboard off, and then we can start to do the repairs. But when there's no electricity, that's much harder to do.
Now, I live in Huntington Beach. How much danger are we in of a tsunami or a flood in case there was a dam way up on... If that breaks, which dam is that? If that breaks, we're going to get flooded out with the channel. I'm hearing all kinds of frightening things.
Yeah, they say the water table is very high in a lot of parts of Orange and Long Beach counties, and that the damage may not just be from a tsunami coming in. I mean, that'll do a lot of damage to houses maybe about a mile inland. But what we really should be concerned about is if there are massive rains or floods, the water table can rise and the flood channels won't handle it. And when they overflow, that's where a lot of the flooding damage can take place.
Is there any estimate of probability of that occurring?
They give it about the same probability as having one of these major earthquakes. I mean, they say El Nino, which happened, quite a few years ago, that really caused a lot of water damage in a lot of parts of Orange County and parts of LA County.
Well, but they keep telling me on the earthquake, we're overdue, man. It's 100%. We're just overdue. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
That's exactly right.
Which is scary.
That is scary. That is scary. You've reminded me of one other super important preparation factor that I think a lot of times we overlook, and that is, in addition to your water lines breaking, your sewer lines sometimes break. And it's not something we give a lot of thought to, but you should make plans for what you're going to use as a toilet until the sewer lines are able to get fixed. Because, and usually people can get by with simply a bucket and trash bags, but a lot of these emergency preparedness stores sell, small little portable toilets. And that will make your life a whole lot easier if you have something to help you out during those few days.
I notice you got something down there that looks like a pack of some kind.
This is a pretty typical emergency preparedness survival bag.
It says survival kit right on it. Okay.
And you can buy these at a lot of different emergency preparedness stores. A lot of the warehouse stores also sell these. These contain the minimum amount of food that you're going to need for 3 days. This one's for 2 persons. It contains some of the things that you might not think about, such as, it looks like it's just tissue, but it can also be used as toilet paper, which sometimes people don't have in their emergency preparedness. Mm-hmm. It contains, some coverings, like some, what do they call them? Some sleeping blankets and sleeping bags, which isn't as big of a problem here in California. It doesn't get super cold, but it's important.
Oh, yeah. If you're back in the middle of winter, back east, it could be, yes.
And one of the most important things that this bag contains is it contains gloves. Because in a time where there's a disaster and you need to be pulling branches off your house or moving things around, there might be broken glass or windows, or it's good to have a good pair of gloves so that you can do that kind of work. So I think this is a great thing to keep in the back of your car, in your trunk, because who knows if you're going to be at home or if you're going to be at work. And I think these are great gifts as well for the holidays for people. I mean, they're very practical
that's a thought.
gifts. I can say my own mother actually gave me one of these for Christmas one year, and at first I thought, gee, thanks, Mom. But, I keep it in my car, and I actually feel much better knowing that my wife has one in her car. So if she's at the grocery store and something happens, I know she's going to be fine for a few days, at least until she can get home.
Until she can walk home.
That's right.
Oh, it's amazing how you can be away from home when it happens. And you don't have to be a long ways away for it to be difficult to get home.
Right. It only takes a fallen pole or a fallen tree, and you could be prevented from getting home in any situation.
Yes. Now, you've been dealing with this kind of problem how long?
I think I've been volunteering for this type of work for at least probably about 16 years now.
How often have problems come up when this would have been handy?
Well, I think in probably almost every emergency situation that I've been to that's fairly medium scale, having a supply like this would have been helpful. If it's an individual home fire, that's one thing. You can still go to the store and buy your supplies.
Oh, yeah.
But anytime people have needed to leave right away, there is a lot of benefit from having a kit like that.
How much can the neighborhood be helpful by organizing? Is this necessary? I'm thinking in case of the viewers here, they have neighbors, and how can they be helpful to each other?
That's a good question. A lot of neighborhood programs start simply by one person getting a catalog or getting a sign-up sheet and just going to their neighbors and saying, hey, I'm going to order some large gallon, 30-gallon water storage barrels, or I'm going to order some of these emergency survival kits, and just taking them and say, would you like me to order one for you? And then they sign up, and then when you order them in bulk, then they find that they're much cheaper. And that can really help a neighborhood to be prepared, because you raise another really good point. A lot of times when we prepare for a disaster, we may be prepared, but our neighbors may be not. And so by virtue of the fact that we're prepared, we're also able to help them, those that aren't prepared.
Somewhat. If we've got enough food for us for 3 days, what about the neighbors?
Right. Right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the things that I remember from Hurricane Katrina is that those people that had been prepared ahead of time, the disaster happened, they went home, made sure that their families were all doing okay, and then that enabled them to go out and start assisting with other people who needed help. And so you are able to help others much quicker when you are prepared yourself.
Oh, if you're in the middle of your own distress, you come back later. I'm putting out fires.
That's right.
Oh, tell me, you began by volunteering. How does a person begin to volunteer? Where do they go to become informed about this? How can we find more help?
I think the most widely known organization is the Red Cross. They seem to have the most classes that you can take. They seem to be invited by a lot of the police departments or fire departments to the most situations that require help for the people. Mm-hmm. I think that's always a good place to begin, because, again, you can take a course and that lets you know a little bit about what you're in for. They have a lot of different types of positions that you can get involved in depending upon what you're interested in. So for me, I was interested in the counseling part of it. For others, they enjoyed being on the food trucks that would drive out and provide food to the people in the disaster-affected areas. Some people were communications people, and they'd stay back at the main office and help to radio and send directions to people.
Most of those communications are ham radios, aren't they?
The majority of them are ham radio.
And we can't rely on our cell phones?
No, although I did find it was very interesting. In all the disasters I've been to, I haven't been able to call on my cell phone, but I've been able to send text messages in every single disaster, even the day after the disaster.
I don't know how to do that. Where do you go to learn? In other words, how do we begin to put ourselves together? One of the things, when I was interviewing the fire chiefs, when I was doing this article back years ago, every one of them said, you cannot rely on the police and the fire. We're there, but we're going to be just as busy and swamped. And how do we, if everybody's trying to call us, how do we know who is in serious? How do we rank the degree of problem? And I was wondering if everybody's somewhat prepared. Now, I went to a CERT class, an introductory class in Huntington Beach a few weeks back. Took a whole Saturday morning, and I'm pleased that they are giving training. Now, most of the communities are doing that, aren't they, around Orange County?
They really are, because I think they recognize that we don't know how many years it's going to be, but we are going to have individual disasters that we need to be prepared for.
Even individual ones or neighborhood ones, but let alone the San Andreas.
Right. I mean, if we have a large earthquake, it will take years for us to recover, and people need to be able to be self-sustaining for at least several weeks before everything gets organized again.
Weeks.
Yes.
When the Northridge earthquake occurred, my friend said he lived in right close to Northridge. He said it threw him out of bed. And he said his kitchen cupboards came open and every dish he owned fell on the floor. It was nothing but broken glass. And windows cracked. He just had all kinds of problems, and he said he tried to call for help. Well,
yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because that raises another good point of just a small thing that everybody can do is to keep an old pair of shoes next to your bed. You know, when your shoes wear out and it's time to get some new tennis shoes, take your old ones and just shove them under your bed, because should an earthquake happen in the middle of the night, and you need to get up real quick and there won't be any power, you know, if your windows are broken and you jump out.
Yeah, he couldn't turn on the lights to see what he was walking on.
That's right. Right next to my bed, I have an old pair of running shoes, and I have a flashlight shoved right in my shoes, so that I just have to reach under. I can pull my flashlight out, slip my shoes on, and then at least I can get around somewhat.
Now, the preparation stages. You're recommending that people call their city hall maybe and find out when CERT classes are?
Absolutely.
Arrange to have neighborhood contacts or something? In other words, how do we organize?
Well, there's a lot of pamphlets that are put out on organizing, but the basic way is get one person who is going to try to organize the effort. Start by helping a neighborhood to just get the basic supplies, a 72-hour kit, emergency survival kit like this one. Then, you know, it's more fun to go take those CERT classes or the Red Cross classes,
If some of your friends go along.
Yeah, and you can go and take the class and then go out to dinner afterwards.
What's CPR?
That's cardiopulmonary resuscitation. It's, you know, it's the mouth-to-mouth breathing and the compressions to help somebody if they stop breathing or if their heart stops. And that's usually combined with a first aid class. And everybody should have some basic first aid training as well, because there's going to be some sort of small injuries, if not major injuries, during a disaster. So take those classes. That's a great way. Have a gathering or do a little mock drill every now and then with your neighborhood and say, hey, let's practice as if there's a disaster. Let's try to get a hold of everybody. Let's make sure everybody's home. That's another good idea.
Can people call you?
Sure.
And maybe you could, from your central position, you could say, you're in what city? Oh, this would be where you should call.
I would be happy to provide those numbers for people.
You do have access to them, so they could, because we're going to give your phone number at the end of the show, so that if someone's watching and they've jot that down, they'd at least know.
Sure.
While we still have time.
Well, you know, in my view, the more the people are prepared, the better off they were going to be.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, there were fires in San Diego, you know, a while back.
Yes.
And that was a second set of fires. And the first set of fires they had, they were not prepared for. And there was, you know, there was a lot of damage and a lot of chaos. When the second set of fires came, the more recent ones, they were much more prepared. People had their emergency supplies and were able to evacuate. That's another big mistake a lot of people make. And this wouldn't be the case of an earthquake, but in case of a large fire, is you know, people wait too long, or they don't make plans for where they could go if they can't live in their current home. And it's always a good idea to have, you know, some sort of place that you can go, a family member's house who lives 50 miles away, 100 miles away, because they'll be outside the affected area. And you'd like to make those plans before the disaster happens.
I have heard something about having a relative out of state so that you could call, who other people could call, so that they know you're okay.
Yes.
Explain that.
Well, the first thing that happens whenever there's a disaster, even when we have a small earthquake here in California, all the phone lines get jammed because everybody else in the United States is trying to call in, and everything just gets clogged up on the phone lines, and sometimes you just can't get any phone calls in. So if you have people outside of the area, then you're not, struggling or competing with the lines coming in, and you can get an outside line.
And if you have this predetermined that your other relatives have called them and told them, they can tell you they're okay, and they can tell the others you're okay. And
that's right. Then they're not all calling you as the point person. You just call one person, and everybody else calls that person as well.
That's good. It's been great to have you on the show to explain some of the things that we need to do. Could you give us just a really quick summary?
You want to have a 72-hour kit complete with food and water. You want to have waterproof and fireproof place for your documents, your birth certificates, and all those types of things. You want to have a small amount of cash on hand in case there's no electricity and you can only use cash to buy things. You want to have some sort of toilet facility. And the last one, which I hadn't mentioned, is it's better to have photographs or videotapes of your belongings in your house now. That will help you a lot when you're dealing with the insurance company later. If your house is in shambles, you can show the things that you had at the time, and it's much easier to get them to cooperate with you then.
Those are all very good points. Todd Huiskin, thank you for being with us on Adventures in Life. We appreciate you here.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us, and I hope that what you heard today proves helpful in case a disaster does happen.